Yes, it is me, HF, and I am here. I'm going to be teaching you all how to make a map in Team Fortress Classic. Yes, so I am the leader of the clan Y La Cabeza Automatica. We are the longest active clan in TFC. We were established in 2003. We died in 2005. We were born again like a phoenix in 2020, and we're still active right now. So I'm a map maker. This year so far, I've made 4 maps. I've made Blue Giant Neon, which is unequivocally the best version of Blue Giant, inspired by Neon Light. Thank you, Neon, for that. I've also made Quattro, Agujero, Fuerte. Holy shit, I've made 5 maps. Quattro, Agujero, Fuerte, and Darkness A. Darkness A is a remap of Darkness, which is my favorite TFC map. Fuerte is a prototypical CTF map. Agujero is a reverse CTF map, and Quattro is a CTF map, but you can only play it 4 versus 4. You can't play it full teams. You have to do O versus D. NWL might be older than Auto. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that's true or not. So when we're talking about map making, we need to get our tools in place. I do not use Hammer. Valve Hammer is the default map making tool that people use, that Valve created to create maps. Hammer is ass. Imagine you're in the country and you're driving and it's like 3 p.m. It's a beautiful fall day. You're driving along. It's kind of a scenic mountain route, and you're looking up in the trees, and all of a sudden in your car, you smell this putrid odor, okay? And you recognize it later to be a skunk. That smell is what Hammer is in map form, map making form, okay? For real. It's ass. I hate it. If you like Hammer, go for it. I'm not going to use it, so I'm going to be using this thing called Quark, which is Quake Army Knife. Here is their website. It's on SourceForge. It is a free download, so you don't have to pay anything. You just go. Where is the download link over here? I don't know. Their download page. So you just go to the download page. I don't know why SourceForge is so slow today, but you just download it to your computer. Okay, here you go. Just boom, download that thing. The next thing you need are compiler tools. This is actually what's going to render your map and create it into a playable thing that the Half-Life engine recognizes. Okay, so I use this thing called Zoner's Half-Life Tools. You can just Google it, or get the URL, ZHLT, Zoner's Half-Life Tools. You just download the latest version, and you want to extract the contents into a folder on your computer. Okay, so once you've downloaded and installed Quark, and once you have got Zoner tools extracted, here we are in Quark. The first thing we need to do is configure it. We're going to go into Edit, Configuration, and we're specifically going to go into Half-Life. The great thing about Quark is it's got a bunch of games already pre-baked into it, so it's going to take a lot of the hard work away from us that we would need in configuration. All you have to do is go to where it says Half-Life, and you're going to want to go and explore to where your Half-Life directory is that contains the hl.exe, or the Half-Life executable. So just click these things, browse to it, put it in there. Next up, because we're making a TFC map, you want to click Add-ons, and you want to click the Add button. And here it actually has a bunch of textures and prefab entities for us to use. I'll get more into that later, for Team Fortress Classic. So just scroll down until you see Team Fortress Classic. You want to get both the textures and the prefabs. You just select that and click OK, and you'll see them populated in your list here, along with the Half-Life entities and textures. Super sweet. The next thing you need to do is we need to tell Quark where our compiler tools are, okay? So there are 4 different executables that are part of our compiler. There's something called CSG, there's something called BSP, there's something called Viz, and there's something called RAD. Essentially what these are going to do is it's going to interpret the geometry of the map you've made and create lighting as well based on the light entities that you've created, and render the whole thing and spit it out as a BSP. BSP files are what the Half-Life engine recognizes that you play on. They're your levels. So all you have to do is browse and look for these four different compilers. So, excuse me, executables that are part of your compilers. So you just browse to where the CSG executable is that you extracted from the zoner tools, the BSP, the viz, the rad. That's all you do. Then you click OK. And now you're ready to go. That's all you needed to do. Again, we specified where our Half-Life executable is. We added our TFC prefab Quark add-ons, and then we've told the editor where our compiler is. Once you've done that, you can go over here and you can click New Half-Life Map. Let's frickin' get it. I'm live on Twitch. This is going to be on YouTube. Make sure you sub to LB's Twitch channel if you like this content. And I don't know, I guess people hear me. People, if you want to engage with me on the chat, let me know. I'll answer your questions. So when you first create a new map, it's going to, by default, create a level for you. I'm just going to left click and drag and select, oh shit. One sec here. I'm going to click everything and delete it. And then I want to start from a blank canvas. What we're going to do in our map that we're making today is we're going to create a resupply room, a flag room, and then we're going to create a yard, and then we're going to duplicate everything to create a base. So we'll have 2-team capture the flag map. So in our editor, there's a lot of stuff going on over here, okay? The biggest thing to know in map making is there's pretty much 2 different types of things you can create. The first thing is a brush or a poly. Quark refers to them as cubes. The other thing is an entity. Entities aren't explicitly visible in the map, but they allow you to control and do things in the map that can be also related to your brushes that you're creating. So over here on the left is how we create new brushes and entities, which is pretty cool. So you can see there's a couple different types of entities that we have because we've added the TFC add-on. We have Half-Life entities and we have TFC entities and prefabs. So these are the 2 entity areas that we'll be operating out of. Also, we have a new cube. So this is how we create new brushes in our map. And we also have light entities. Light's self-explanatory. That's going to create light in our map. By default, because the compiler that we're using, if we create a light texture on the map, it will emit light by default, but we can also manually manipulate and add lights by creating light entities. So when we're creating a map, all entities have to be inside of your map. You can't have entities that exist outside of the geometry that you're building. If that happens, it's something called a leak, and leaks are evil. It does not allow your map to be created. So you want to make sure that when you're creating all your world geometry, that everything is encapsulated within brushes. So when we're creating a room, we want to make sure there's a ceiling, there are walls, and there is a floor. If those brushes aren't touching each other and encapsulated together, you're going to have a leak in your map, and your map will not compile. I have grid form enabled, so if we go in the top left corner here, you can specify how big or small you want your grid to be. Your cubes that you create by default will snap to those grid lines. I like using 8 by default. I feel like that is a good starting place. Sometimes I go down to 4 if I'm trying to create more precise brushes, but what we're doing today, 8 is acceptable. Also, this thing right here is the camera. We have 3 views in our editor. We have like an overhead view and a side cross view, and then like an XYZ view essentially. And then in the bottom right hand corner is actually a OpenGL rendering of the map that we're creating. It's not going to render light, so everything's going to look a little weird, but it gives you like a baseline idea of what to expect. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create some cubes. We're going to create a resupply room. Over here by this compass is how we make our map zoom in and zoom out. So we can zoom in at a very granular level, or we can zoom out and get a huge overview level. Within this light blue view is the limits of the map we can create. You can't create any brushwork outside of that. If you do, you're going to get an error, so don't do that. So I'm just going to start creating in the middle of the map. Depending on what you're creating, you may actually want to create on the edge of the map, because if you create big bases, you're gonna want to make sure that there's enough room to fit them on. So, but for this example, I'm just gonna create in the middle of the map. It doesn't matter. So I'm gonna click the cube button, and boom, here is a new cube that we created. You can see it over here, and if you are in over here, you can right mouse click to move your mouse around, and you can also use the arrow keys to move in, out, left, and right. And you can again hold the right mouse button to manually, with your mouse, look around that view. So I'm going to create a floor of our resupply room first. And then I'm also going to create an entity called a info player start. So I clicked where the Half-Life entities are. They're organized. This one I want is a player start. You need to at least have one player. You can only have one, and you should have one player start entity in your map. This is going to show the default view of the map when you load in. So wherever this player entity is looking when you start your level, that is where the map is, what the map is going to show. So I like using this as a reference point because it gives the player height. That way you know exactly how large of things you're creating. So I'm going to use this blue line as a guide and put my floor down here. And everything I'm going to do is pretty much in conjunction with these grid units. It's a great baseline for us when we start texturing our map, so that our textures line up and don't look all janky and weird. So I'm going to go ahead. I like texturing as I go. I don't create a whole map and go back and texture it. That's because we want to make sure our textures are aligned correctly. And if you create a whole map and then go back and texture it, it can be very difficult. So I'm just going to left click to select my cube, and I'm going to go here in the bottom left hand corner to my texture editor, and I'm going to apply a texture to it. This is going to open a texture browser window. Everything in Half-Life is organized into these different folders, and when you click on a folder, it's going to show you the different textures in that folder. You can see there are TFC specific textures, and there are also all of these Half-Life textures, and some actually have subfolders. So like this level specific folder, they actually have subfolders in here, because if you click on the main level, you don't see anything, but if you click and expand to get to the subfolders, you can see all of the different textures in here that you can use. So I'm going to go in the TFC, and we're just going to use TFC textures to keep it easy. But you can use any of these textures, okay? Any texture you see in here, you can use. So I'm going to start with the blue base first, because Team Fortress, usually 2 teams. I'm going to use this Crete 4 blue texture as my floor. And I'm going to zoom up above it, and you can see right now that it's going to align itself, its origin point, to the map, to the world that we created. So if I move this entity around, you can see, this cube around, you can see the texture always stays applied in the same space to it. If you're using Valve Hammer, that is not the case. It does not work like that. So I've created my floor, and you can see my player texture, or my player here. Here's the overhead view in the bottom left-hand corner. And I'm going to make it a little bigger. This is pretty small. So I'm just going to make, let's see, this is, again, I'm using everything as a grid to help me out. I'm just going to start with a 4x4. So this is 4 grid units by 4 grid units. And let's actually make it 8x8. Let's make it a little bigger here. So I'm going to do and again, I'm dragging, didn't explain this, I'm dragging on these little boxes to expand the brushwork, to make it bigger or larger. And you can select it and use the arrow keys in the view that you're in order to move it. So if my mouse is up here and I move it, you'll see that it moves in a different direction based off of which view I'm currently in. So if I'm trying to make this brush appear higher in the level, I'll be in this view and I'll just click my mouse up, or you can just select the dark box in the middle and drag it up to bring your brushwork higher or lower. And again, you select these boxes to elongate or make smaller your brushwork. And you can do all sorts of crazy things as well. We're going to keep things very simple here. This is just an introductory tutorial. So, okay, there is my resupply room floor. Now I'm going to create a new cube, and we're going to start creating the walls. So I'm going to create this wall over here. I know the view, it may take you a while to get used to the views. I mainly like operating in the overhead view, because this is like a top-down view of the level. If we move around here, you can see it a little better when I'm creating. And I'm going to make this a little smaller here, and you can see that the resupply room is a little higher than the head of the player. Keep in mind the player jumps, so you don't want to be creating levels where the player it has to duck or they get stuck. So we're going to actually create this one grid unit higher and have it 3 grid units tall. That to me feels like a good height for a room. You can do whatever you want. We're going to select the brush, go into the texture editor, TFC textures, and let's apply this texture to it. Now you can see automatically here that this texture is misaligned. It doesn't look correctly. So what we're going to do is select the face of the cube that we want to align the texture on. And you can do that by clicking the little box, and it will show you in yellow the face that you have selected. In this view, the white lines show the brush you have selected, and the yellow lines show you the face of that brush. Because we're creating cubes, each cube is going to have, 6 sides or 6 faces. So, yeah. I forgot to mention, too, I'm wearing a stag shirt from AD. So AD got me this stag shirt. This stream and recording may or may not be sponsored by Stag, y'all. It's up to you. Free for you decide. But always, folks, always free to be bold. All right. So how do we align this texture? Well, if we go into our texture editor in the bottom left-hand corner, you can actually grab where these 2 blue lines intersect and move them to align the texture where you want it. And it will actually snap to the red grid it's creating. So I'm going to drag this texture to the lower left-hand corner, and you can see it aligns perfectly with the brush that I've created. Sometimes, however, you may create a texture. Not all textures are the same sizes. Some textures are smaller, some textures are larger. So let's say, for instance, we were using this texture instead. You can see that even though it is aligned where I want it to, it is not replicating, or it looks weird. You can see it's duplicating itself. In this case, you have 2 options. You can either make your brush smaller, so I will reduce this brush to the size that the texture is, or if you're like, you know what, I really like how the size of my brush, I want to edit the texture to fit the face. Again, we'll select the face, and you can use these texture tools to automatically scale the texture to fit the face you've created. There's several different options. One is adjust the texture to fit the face. This is going to stretch that individual texture out and make it fit the face completely correct. In this case, it looks a little weird. You can see this texture looks massive, and the scaling of it is massive. Probably not the best scenario. If we select the face again, you can actually see in these specific options the texture scale. In this case, it's scaling the texture 3 times its size in one direction, in 1.5 times its size in the other direction. These represent height and width. So this texture is being split 3 times its scale wide and 1.5 times its scale high. I don't like going above 2 ever for either height or width. If you go over 2, things start to look pretty janky. But you can do whatever you want. There's another option, which is to simply adjust the texture to the face, but keep scaling to a minimum. This is what I use most of the time. So I'm going to click that button, and you can see here it has scaled the texture to fit the face, but it has adjusted the scale so the scale isn't crazy. In this case, what it's decided to do is create a second level to the texture, so the texture is now duplicating itself, but it fits our face and it looks correct. So if this is how you intended the wall to look by just duplicating the texture, you can go for it. I'm going to use a different texture that fits the face better that I want to use. This is why I texture as I go along. If you just build in using whatever textures you want, and you go back, you texture later, sometimes your textures may not fit correctly. So I'm going to use this texture, and you can see it doesn't fit the face right now. That's because it's using the scaling that I had in place before. So I'm going to have to click the scaling button again for it to fix the scale on this. And it has decided to make the width 0.75% of what the original texture was. I'm going to change that back to 1. Sometimes, depending on what textures you use, you want them to align exactly or not exactly. It's up to you in terms of scaling and origin on how you want to adjust the face. So what I'm going to do now is you can, of course, copy and paste in this editor. So I'm just going to Control C to copy and Control V to paste. And I'm going to duplicate this brush to create our 4 walls. So I'm just using the editor to adjust these faces, and I'm just moving the brushwork using the overhead view to create my 4 walls. Alrighty, so again, copy paste, pasting the brush. It's going down here, and boom, now we have our resupply room, pretty much. And again, I'm always snapping to the grid here, just keeps your stuff clean. You can see here that our texture is not aligned correctly. All you have to do is click on the texture, click on the face, click this button, and there you go. Another thing you can do is we can change the origin point of the texture and apply that to the face as well. Because I know this origin point from my world geometry is where I want the texture to look, I can then click this face over here and just replace the texture origin value with that value. And look at that. It snaps right exactly where I want it to. That is an alternative way as opposed to texture scaling every single time. Okay, so let's create a roof to our room. I'm going to take the floor and just copy paste it, and using our side cross section, I'm just going to move it to the top. And there we go. Now that's not a very good ceiling texture, so I'm going to go back into our texture editor, and I'm going to find something that is more appropriate. So in our TFC textures, these ones are specific to TFC. There's not really a good texture for a ceiling in here. I'm instead going to move over to the concrete folder, and the concrete folder has some nice generic textures to use. I'm going to use this one called Crete Wall and use this as my ceiling instead. So there we go. We got a room. Now to get out of this room, we could either create a hallway or create a door. Because this is the resupply room, I'm going to create a door. To create a door, I'm just going to, and you can select brushes in the 3D view as well. You just left click and you can click on the things. So I'm going to use this, I'm going to zoom out real quick so you can see my resupply room. I can zoom back in. I am going to move this wall over here, and then I'm going to duplicate it, pasting it on top of itself, and then drag it back over here to create another wall, and now we have an entryway. And then in this entryway, I'm then going to copy paste and move the brush over, and now it looks the same. It looks like one single wall, right? But they're actually 3 separate brushes creating it. And for this brush, I'm going to go into the texture editor, and I'm going to create a door. I'm going to use a door texture. I'm going to resize the brush to fit the door texture, and then I'm going to copy paste and move this brush over the top of the door. So now we have a fully enclosed resupply room with a door in it. And I'm going to change this door, and I'm going to move it so that it is slightly thinner than our walls. That way it's clear that it is a doorway. That way everything's not just flush with one another. And I can already see here that this texture isn't aligning, so I'm going to go back and copy my texture origin, select the face where it's not aligning, and paste it. And there you go. You can see it's aligned. And then I'm going to go over to our texture for the ceiling, and I'm going to copy the texture name and select our brush that's above the door, select the face of the ceiling, and instead of it being this wall texture, I'm just going to paste the texture of the ceiling instead. So now we have a door. You can already see there's no floor to that door. So I am going to copy, paste the floor, and drag it over so that it extends over where the door is. And now's our time to talk about entities. Entities is the invisible elements you create in your map. Sometimes they can be visible, but for the most part you don't see them. That tells the game brushwork how to act. So this looks like a door, but it's a wall. The engine doesn't know it's a door. So we are going to go over here to our entity list, and we're going to create a function entity for a door. So by default, the editor is going to create a door for us, a brush for us, but we don't want to use their brush. We want to use our brush that we created. So I'm going to switch view over to our hierarchy view here. We can see the door entity. I'm going to expand it, and it's created a brush. I'm going to delete that brush. I'm then going to select the door brush that I want to use, and I'm going to drag it under here. So now that brush is associated with the door entity. You can see here there is a little dinghy protruding from the door. This is the direction the door will open. I want this door to open up, so I'm going to change the direction of the dinghy to be up. So when you interact with this door, it will go up. Then I'm going to go into the entity properties, and this is all of the properties of the door that specifies things related to the door. So we can give the door a name, and we have all of these specific arguments related to how the door operates. And if you hover over the argument field, it will tell you, the editor will tell you, hey, what does this do? What does this mean? So we're going to create a speed that the door opens. I'm going to select 800. I believe that means it moves 800 units per second. So this is fairly fast. It will open fairly fast. You can experiment with this if you want the door to open more slowly or more quickly. Wait is how long the door stays open before it closes, and this is always in seconds. And it's telling us, the editor's telling us, if you use a -1 value here, the door will always be open. Because it's a resupply room, we want it to close. So I'm going to put 2 for 2 seconds. Damage is the amount of damage the player takes if the door is blocked. So if it closes on your head, I want it to do 10 damage to you. You could change this to be something crazy like 10,000 damage, in which case it would instantly kill you. But we're going to say 10. Health means if you shoot the entity, it will open. We don't want to do that. In some instances, that makes sense. And lip means how much of the door brush is visible when it's fully closed. We're going to change this to 2. I like having a little bit of the door visible when it's fully closed. And we also get sounds. So you can experiment with what these sounds are to see which sounds you like the best. I'm going to change this to a vacuum for its move sound. So when the door moves, it's going to make a vacuum sound. And then I'm going to use a stop sound of chunk. So when the door comes to a full stop, it's going to execute the chunk sound. The last thing we want to do is, because it's the blue team, we want to make sure that only blue characters can use this door. So under here you can see activation criteria that's specific to TFC. So we're going to click that button, and we are going to change the team number to be the blue team. And this is telling the engine that, hey, only the blue team gets to use this door. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the bottom texture of the door to be something that is not this, because that looks weird. So I'm going to go back into our texture editor, and let's see, I'll go to the generic section, and I'm just going to use this texture. And then I'm going to use the adjust texture face using minimal scaling. So that way I'm going to simulate the door opening by simply moving it up. And you can see here what the bottom of the door looks like now. That will be visible to the player when the door is up all the way. There we go. Okay, so we've created a door. We have not created a light, however. So this room is completely freaking dark right now. So we're going to go up here to top left and create a light entity. And the light entity, we're going to move it to be in the center of our room. And I'm going to move it to be towards the top of our room. You can position this however you want. The white circle you see is the radius of light being emitted, as well as the color of light being emitted. If you go over here This is telling you the color of light as well as the final number is its intensity. You can change the color of light by clicking this button, and you could say, hey, it's the blue team. Maybe I want the light to be blue. You'll see the circle changes to blue. The room light is now blue. I'm going to use a slight yellow color to it kind of mimicking fluorescent light. Fluorescent light is not daylight, it's warmer, so I'm going to use a warm color here. And I'm going to also change its intensity to be about 150. That way it's touching almost all sides of my room, but it'll have a nice glow without being super bright. If you create a light that's way too bright for the room, you just kind of wash everything out and it's very, doesn't look good. So, and you can create more lights if you want. I can duplicate this light and put 4 smaller lights in here if I want. I'm just going to create 1 light. We also need team spawns, right? Because right now, this info player start, again, is just the camera of what you see when you first load the level. It's not an actual team spawn. So I'm going to go into here under my Team Fortress entities. I'm going to go to Team Fortress Classic, Team Starts, and I'm going to do an info player team spawn. This is what is actually the team spawn for our team. We need to go down to our team number and change this to blue to signal, hey, this is where you spawn if you're blue. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to create, you want to have as many team spawns as however many people you think are going to be playing the map. So if your map is 9 versus 9, you want to have at least 9 of these in your respawn. If you have less than that, what will happen is people will spawn on top of themselves, killing each other. So this dingle that is protruding from the thing is the orientation that the player will spawn. I'm going to orient them to spawn towards our spawn door. That way they're not looking at a wall when they spawn in. You can see here it's called the angle. You can manually change this as well. It's on a 0 to 360 scale. So I'm then going to duplicate this entity a couple times. You want to make sure your team spawns aren't all on top of each other. If you have team spawns all on top of each other, oh, look at that. For some reason this angle got messed up. There we go. Okay. All right, so we're just going to duplicate that. I'm just copying, pasting, and dragging it using the top-down world view. And there we go. You want to make sure they're far enough away from each other that they don't spawn on top of each other. If you put these 2 spawns right on top of each other like this, you could cause team frag because the players spawn right on top of each other. You want to make sure there's at least, I usually leave at least 2 grid elements away from each other. Oh, there is a light on my face. Yeah, I'm in front of a window right now, LB. So that's what's going on. So here we go. I have 3 spawn in here right now. That's how I'm going to leave it. You can create more, you can create less. This is just a test level, so I'm not going to do anything crazy. And let's see here. We're going to create a... Next thing we need to do is we need to create some backpacks. I'm actually going to cheat and copy my backpack from a previous map. Good thing, this is a good time to say save frequently. Always save frequently because the editor may crash, something may go weird. You want to constantly be saving. So I'm not going to save this as a Quark Explorer file. Just click no. It's going to ask you where you want to save your map to. We're going to call this TFC test. There our map is. I'm going to go to a previously map that I've created just to save myself some time so that we can talk about creating a backpack. In Team Fortress, backpacks are what people use to resupply themselves. So I'm going to go into a map I have previously created, and I'm just going to copy a backpack so I don't have to manually create one. Don't want to do that. So now we're going to go back into my map. I'm going to paste the backpack I created. And we're going to go over the backpack arguments here. So I'm going to create the backpack. Again, this is an entity, so you're not going to be able to see it in the map. in the map editor, but it will become a backpack in the game world. So I'm going to move this entity to be, let's see, right here looks fine. I'm going to move the dangle to orient the position of the backpack towards the middle of the map. And I always create, in the 8 grid view that I have right now, I always create this entity 2 spaces above the floor. You don't want your backpack spawning in the floor. You also don't want your character spawning in the floor. You want them a little above the floor so they don't get stuck in it or so the model doesn't appear inside of it. So here is the arguments for a backpack in Team Fortress. It is using a model, which is the backpack model. It is using a sound name for when you grab the model. This one is called resupply, or it's a resupply sound. And then down here are all of the arguments for how the model behaves. These 2 arguments at the beginning are just relevant towards a backpack model. So you would just create G underscore A, G underscore E. To do that, you can right click and say add a specific. You would do G underscore A and click enter and then enter 1. And I already have it in there, so it's duplicated, so I'm going to remove it. You would create G underscore A, G underscore E. These are specifics relevant to the behavior of a backpack. Wait is how long it takes for the backpack to become available again in seconds. So this is 5. So when you take one, every 5 seconds, it will appear again. And then this is telling us how much resupply to give the player character. We have shells, we have cells, rockets, nails, health, and then armor. So this is team number 1, so blue team. Before it was set to 2, which would be the red team. You could also go into activation criteria and set it there. But this is the blue resupply. We want to make sure it's the blue team. So health and armor dictate how much health and armor the player get. You could also create these as individual health and armor entities. If you go back into Team Fortress Classic and go to armor entities, you can create armor there. If you go into Half-Life, you can go and create a let's see, I forget where the med kit is in here, but there is a med kit entity that you can create that is a med kit that you grab. I like creating backpacks and using backpacks to resupply. I don't like creating armor and health. I don't think it's necessary. So I'm going to create a couple backpacks here. I'm just going to create 3, 1 for each player. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can have a better view of my grid system here. And yeah. So I'm going to create the backpacks far away enough from each other, Neon, that they can easily be grabbed by one individual player. So now I have 3 backpacks in here, 3 player spawns, and a door. So I'm going to move my camera to be outside the door. You can see my door texture is incorrect on this side. So I'm going to select the face and select adjust to face to correct that. And then I'm also going to create our next room. So I'm copying the floor texture. I'm going to drag the floor texture out. This is the flag room. You can create, of course, any room you want here. We're just keeping it simple. I'm going to make the flag room be bigger than the resupply room. So here is our flag room. I'm just going to drag this to be bigger. Again, it can be any size that you want. So here is our flag room area. So you can already see here these textures aren't aligning correctly on the other side. So I will grab our texture origin for a correctly assigned texture, and I'm just going to paste it on our brushes to align it correctly. And origin. And then I'm going to extend these brushes out so they meet the floor that I've created. And then I'm going to duplicate them to create our 4 walls of the flag room. Now you can get as intricate or as simple as you want when creating this geometry. Again, this is a starter tutorial. You can get into all sorts of crazy things here. We're just creating basic rooms to keep things nice and simple. Okay, here we go. So again, we have another texture that is not aligned correctly. So I'll grab our texture origin and then apply it to that face. There we go. So now our room looks great. We are doing everything on our grid scale. So you can see here our textures look great. Everything looks really solid. We're going to create our ceiling again. So I'm just going to copy paste the floor. Yeah, I'm going to copy paste the floor. And then I'm going to go into this room and grab the texture name and select the entire brush and apply the texture to that brush. So now we have our flag room. I'm going to create let's see, what should we do? I'll create a little platform in the corner where the flag is. So I'm going to select our floor. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and I'm just going to create something like maybe 1 unit taller. And I'm going to organize it and drag it so that it's in the corner here because I want our flag to be in this corner. Okay, there we go. So you can see I've created a little platform here. I'm going to change the texture of that platform. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to select a different texture. I'm going to select this tunnel texture and create this little warning texture. And then I'm going to select the top face of that texture and apply another different texture to it just for some variation, so that not everything is the exact same texture. This is where the flag sits, so it's more important. So I'm going to tell the player that by just using a different texture there so that it stands out. Let's see here. It really doesn't matter that much. Again, you can get lost in all of the textures that are here. There are so many ones to choose from. We will go to, I don't know, y'all. I'm just quickly digging through the textures here to find something that looks different. So let's not use that. That texture is not lining up correctly. This is the hardest part for me is finding textures that I like that are going. Oh, you can see here that actually I'm not snapped to the grid exactly. I'm a little over, so I'm going to move this guy back, and there we go. Okay, there we go. So there's my platform for where the flag is. So we're going to create the flag, and this is why Quark is awesome, because it already has a flag for us. We're going to go into our Team Fortress entities. We're going to go into our prefabs. There's a button called prefabs. We're going to go to CTF, and we're going to select blue flag. And automatically, it's creating the flag for us. So the flag is 2 different entities put together. One of them is the model of the flag, and the other one is an entity telling the game engine how the flag behaves. So I'm going to drag this flag to be in the middle of our pedestal here. And again, just like backpacks, you want the flag to be 2 units above the floor. So that way it's not just sitting on the floor, it's sitting slightly above the floor. And in here, it has created a folder for us called blue flag. And again, here is the item entity. The item entity is telling us that this is the blue flag model. And you can see the dangle is already oriented the way I want it to. I want it to be facing outward. You can change and orient this any angle you want. And it has all of these different specifics and arguments to it. Essentially, it's saying what game noises does it play when the flag is interacted with? How long is the flag available before being dropped before it resupplies? Who owns the flag? Who can grab the flag? What does it say to the opposing team when they have the flag? You don't have to worry about this stuff because it's already built in to this prefab. And it's really convenient, really easy. This dangle we want to orient to be in the same position as the other one, which is going to be 0 degrees. And these two entities work together to, again, create the flag model and to tell the game engine the behavior for how the flag works. So that flag is now positioned here. I am going to create a light and put it in between these two entities. I'm going to make that light blue, and I'm putting it over here to signify and to draw attention that this is the blue flag room. I'm then going to copy this light and create another light in the middle of the room, but this one I'm just going to have that basic yellow color. So now there is a yellow light to light the room. There's a blue light over by the flag drawing attention to, hey, that's the flag, and there's another one just generically lighting the room for us. Okay, so now we have a resupply room, we have our flag, and now we need a way to get out of our base. So I'm going to go ahead and create a yard area. So I'm going to create a small hallway first and then a yard. So to create a hallway, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretty much just leave a space where these two walls were, just so that way the player can walk into the flag room. I'm going to make that space 3 units wide, so that way it doesn't feel like a tight constricting hallway. You can make these very tiny or very large as you want. I'm then going to drag this guy out, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to make him 8 units long, and then I'm going to drag this one out 5 grid units because I want our hallway to be 3 units wide always. So now I'm going to drag our floor texture underneath. Oop, that's the ceiling. Going to grab our floor texture out over here. Move that guy over and align. And we can see already our hallway taking shape here. I'm now going to copy and paste this guy to create another wall over here. And then I'm going to drag that wall up. Boom, look at this, y'all. Frickin' hallway. Frickin' awesome. Okay, so here's a little hallway to get into the flag room. You can make this as wide or as short as you want. I'm going to zoom back out so you can see our overhead view. We have our resupply room, we have our flag room, and we have our hallway leading out of our base. So I am going to have this be the, I'm going to have this hallway drag out a couple more units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll make this 6 units. And 6 units. And then I'm going to drag this guy up over here. So our floor is there. I'm then going to give us a ceiling. So I'm going to copy the ceiling and do the same thing that I did for the floor. There we go. All right, so now we have our hallway completed, and this is going to be the outside of the base. So I'm going to save my file here. And the outside of the base, I want the textures to be different, just to signify, let's see, let's move this guy over here too. I want the textures to be different. So what I'm going to do is to signify this is a different area. So you can apply different textures to different faces of the same brush. So I'm just going to select this brush, go here. I happen to know some like textures that I like to use, so I'm going to use this texture instead. You can see it's not fitting the face correctly, so I'm going to select it to fit the face, and then I am going to copy the texture scale and apply it to this face. And then I'm also going to copy the texture name, paste it, and then copy the texture origin. So all of these textures are now aligned correctly. There we go. Alrighty, and then I want this texture to be blue to signify that this is in fact the blue base. So I'm going to go into our TFC textures, and I will grab, let's grab this guy, but I only want to use the bottom half of the texture, the blue part. So I'm going to use the blue part here, but it doesn't quite line up correctly, so I'm going to increase the texture scale. to 1.5 and then move it so that, there we go. Okay, so there we go. So I've created kind of a different texture on the outside of the base so that people notice that this is the outside of the base. I'm also going to do that on the side of this texture as well. So I'm going to copy the texture name and apply it to the side of the face. And then the same thing, I'm going to copy the texture origin and texture scale. So you can see everything is aligning, and then I'm going to do the same thing as well for this face. So that's 1.25, 1.2, and then for this face as well, which is 1.25, 1.2. And then I'm going to copy the origin just to make sure everything is lined up exactamundo. There we go. And then I'm going to drag, there's a little overlap here, so I'm going to drag this guy to be flush with that wall. And then I'm going to copy the texture name, paste 1.5, 1.5, and then copy the texture origin, paste. There we go. So here's like the outside of our little base that we've created. I'm going to make the base taller because maybe people want a concussion grenade jump. I'm just duplicating the texture. We'll make this one, I don't know, 4 units high. And then I'm going to go in here and apply a different texture to the whole face. Let's see what texture we like here. There's a good silo one that I like that a lot of people use outside. Let me see if I can find that texture. Again, you can get lost here for hours in texture land. You can also search, use the search tool if you knew a texture name but you weren't sure which folder it was in. Here is the silo texture I want. There we go. So I'm going to use this silo texture, and I'm going to make sure the scale is the same. We're going to use 1.5, 1.5. That applies the scale to the entire brush, all faces. I'm then going to duplicate it and move it over here to be on the remainder of the outside of our base. There we go. And the final thing is that I'm going to create a logo. So I'm copy pasting, and then I'm going to create the blue team logo to identify this as the blue base. So I'm going into our TFC textures, and it's a TFC sign texture. Here we go. And then I'm going to adjust the brush to be the same size as the texture, which I believe it's just, I think I screwed up the texture scale. What's the scale? 1.5, 1.5. Okay, so that's going to be 3 units by 3 units. And I'm going to move it to be like over the door, I guess, to signify this is how you actually get into the blue base. And then I'm going to select the face and do adjust, but fit. There we go. I use the fit because if I use scale, it's going to scale it and make it smaller. I don't want that. I want it to be big. So there we go. Now these brushes are on top of each other. You see that? So I'm going to have to manipulate this brush and size it around that guy so that they're not on top of each other. So I'm just copy pasting, folks. It's copy paste bonanza, and I'm just modifying this brush so that it goes around the team sign that I've created. That's all I'm doing here, folks. Doing it quickly. There we go. Saving. All right, there we go. So you can see they're not on top of each other anymore. This brush exists around the other ones. I'm then going to go copy my light entity that was blue from the flag room, and I'm going to put it right in front of my sign here. So it's going to be emitting a blue light. Okay, now we're going to create the yard area. I'm going to be creating some new cubes here. and I'm going to have them be really, really tall, creating this on the side outside my base. This is the default texture that gets applied. I think it's just in, I don't know why, but it's the default texture that gets applied. I think you can change it. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to outside, and I'm going to just get some rocks. And then I'm going to change the texture scaling to be 2 to 2, so I'm making it much larger so that it doesn't repeat as much. And then I'm just going to drag this guy out. Let's see, maybe 12 units. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There we go. Okay, so here is the outside yard area. I'm going to duplicate this and move it to this side and change it so that it is meeting the other one. And now let's create the floor of the outside. So I'm going to expand this brush up here. And now I don't want the blue base floor texture to be outside. I want to use like a ground texture because it's like a base has been built into this canyon. So I'm going to go back to outside again, and we're just going to grab a ground texture. That one's kind of ugly. Let's see. We'll use like a gravel texture maybe. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this 1.5, 1.5 to minimize it being repeated. This one's a little too pink. I don't like how pink it is, so I'm actually going to change it to, we'll use this ground texture. That one's kind of brown. It fits the tone a little better. Then I'm going to copy and paste it to create the remaining floor on the other side. And here we go. So we now have a fully completed blue base. How cool is that? We have our resupply room, we have our flag room, and we also have our flag inside of the base. So when the player comes in to the base, boom, there it is. So we don't have a capture point yet. So we're going to create a capture point, and I'm just going to put it outside. You can put wherever you want. Usually in Team Fortress maps, there'd be like a battlements area, a higher area of your fort or whatever you're creating. This is a very basic map. We're not going to do that. So I am going to copy and paste actually our flag room pedestal, and I'm going to use that as the basis for our capture point. So I've just copy and pasted it outside right here, and then I'm going to make a sign that lets people know this is the capture point. So I'm going to copy and paste this wall, and I'm going to resize it. I should have got some water, y'all. I'm freaking dying here. All right, there's our wall, and I'm going to select the face and give it a sign, and the sign is going to say capture point. I'm going to resize it to be 1 to 1, and I'm actually going to have it be 0.5 to 0.5. So I'm going to shrink the texture and make it a little smaller. I don't need the texture being that huge. Then I'm going to resize it to line up, resize the brush to line up with the texture. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's see, I can't see the bottom of it. How does that look? That looks good. Okay. So we're going to just keep resizing here to get it to the point that we want. You, of course, could manually do this. You could do this using the texture resize tool. But I want this to be half. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to move this to the middle of that brush, and I'm just going to move it up a couple. So now people know, hey, that's where you actually capture the flag. And then I'm going to resize my wall to be around this brush. Because if you have brushes on top of each other, they may not be visible the way you anticipate in the engine. The compiler is just going to compile it as however. So you never want to have two brushes on top of each other. You want them to be individually located. And you can see when I did that, it screwed up my texture over here. So I'm going to go back into the inside here and resize this texture to match the origin point of this guy. Oh, I think it was the scaling. The scaling was messed up. Oh, shit. I'm doing it to the capture point. That's the wrong side. Okay, 1.25, 1.2. Is that right? Did I get that wrong? It's still, you can see still it's a little off. 1.25 to 1.2. Why is that still off a little bit? Oh, it's just 1-to-1. 1-to-1. I was selecting the wrong face. I probably screwed up my texture outside now as well. There we go. Change the origin there. There we go. Okay, so you can see it's aligned properly. This is the fun stuff you in the outside still looks good. Cool. This is the fun stuff you get into when messing around with textures. I had the wrong face selected and I was modifying it because I had the whole brush selected. So if you have brushes, you can see this brush serves as both the outside part of the base as well as the inside part of the base. And look here, see I accidentally changed this texture over here. So I have to go in. Oh, okay, so this is interesting. So I've extended this brush to be both outside and inside, and it can only be one texture. So I'm actually going to have to duplicate this brush so that it's two different brushes so that I can use a different texture outside than inside. So this is cool. I'm glad I messed up so you guys get to see some of the fun stuff that occurs. So I need to copy the texture name and just apply it to the face. And my brush work all screwed up there. And then the texture 1-to-1. There we go. Okay, so that is now fixed. And because these are two different brushes now, I can have them be next to each other and have different textures applied. And to the casual eye, they're not going to notice the difference. Cool. Oh, God, now this is screwed up. No, it's good. We're good. Cool. All right, there's the capture point. Now we need to go into our prefab for TFC and create a blue capture point. Again, it is going to... Okay. Did I just create I just created another blue flag. CTF blue capture point. There we go. It's going to create another poly. We're going to delete that because we want our own geometry. And then I'm going to select the brush I've created for the capture point, and I'm going to be dragging it under the blue capture point right there. And then I'm going to select this entity. This is ITG is a way for the engine to interact specifically with TFC. And you can have it do all sorts of crazy things. In this instance, we're using it for our capture point. So if we go and look at the specifics and arguments here, it is specifying a lot of things pertaining to how to capture the flag. So it's going to be playing messages to both teams when a flag is captured. It's going to be interacting with the flag to say you can use this to capture it. It's just all of these specific arguments that we don't have to worry about because, again, we're using these prefabs that the is built into Quark, which is pretty cool. So here is a poly that is going to actually designate where the capture area is, okay? And this is called a trigger entity because it's using this thing called a trigger texture, which is AAA trigger. That means when certain criteria is met, it will cause something to happen. In this case, it's saying if the player has the flag and they exist here, they capture it. So I'm going to resize this trigger, and this is invisible. Trigger is always an invisible texture, but you can see I've resized it and I've placed it above where I want my capture point to be. So if you have the flag, the red flag, and you move on top of this area, the engine will know that this is where you capture the flag. And it's going to give you, if we go into the thing here, it's going to give the player frags as how many points the player gets. It's going to give them 10 points, and it's going to increase the blue team score by 10. It's also going to give the player who captured full health. I want to give them full grenades as well. So you can create an argument called no grades 1 and one called no grenades 2, which is simply saying the number of grenades you want to give, because grenades are a thing. And I'm going to say let's give them 4 grenades for both primary and secondary for capturing the flag. Okay, there we go. So the blue base is now absolutely complete. There's nothing left to do. We are going to... I'm going to create a new folder in here. Whoops. I'm going to undo that. I had selected this folder, so it created a subfolder. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder Blue Base. For me, organizationally, and I'm going to select everything here and move it under blue. Oh, I just called it Blue Base. So folders are just a way within Quark to organize what you've created. I could have created a folder called flag room and only created my brushes for my flag room in there. But you can see here, if I select blue base, it's now selected my entire level because everything exists within that. Well, Team Fortress, we want 2 teams, so I'm going to copy and paste blue base and then rename it to red base. And then up here at the top, we have some tools to reshape our geometry. Over here, we can position and flip the geometry. I'm going to flip it on the x-axis, and then I'm going to flip it on the y-axis. And it has created essentially a copy of the blue base. And I'm going to move that copy to be adjacent to our outside geometry for our yard. And now, if we turn around, we have a carbon copy of our blue base. Pretty freaking sweet, right? So we have an exact copy of the blue base. But now you're saying, well, hold on, we want this to be the red base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the blue capture point and the blue flag. And I'll recreate a red capture point and a red flag instead. I'm not going to... I want to move this geometry out first. I deleted my pedestal that I created. So I'm going to delete the blue capture point and the blue flag. Those entities are now gone. I'm also going to select my lights that were blue and change them to red. Because if they were blue, blue in the red base, it's going to be a little confusing, right? Doesn't make much sense. So those are now red. Now the cool thing that I can do in Quark is I can replace textures. So I'm going to select the entire red base. I'm then going to go to search at the top, and I'm going to say search replace textures. The first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to copy the texture name that I want to replace. And then I'm going to select the red base, and I'm going to go to search replace textures. I'm going to paste in the texture name and then click browse. And I'm going to select the replacement texture that I want, which is the red logo. And then I'm going to say search replace. And now everywhere where it found that logo or that texture, it's going to replace it. Nice. So now this is another texture that I want to replace. So I've copied the texture name. I've selected the red base. I'm going to go to search replace texture. I'm going to paste in the texture name. And we know that this is the blue base wall. There is a red base copy, so I'm going to select that, search replace. Boom. Now it looks beginning to more look like the red base, right? And we have a floor is still blue in here though. So we're going to select the floor texture name, select the red base, and then go to search replace, paste the floor name, go in here, and then find the red equivalent, which is, there are actually 2. I'll just use this one. There we go. And then now the last thing we need to do is replace the texture of the door. So I got the door name, selecting the door base, search replace, door name. There is a red copy out there, which is called, it may not be... Yeah, see, it's not in, it's not in here. So let me actually go and see what that is actually called, where it exists. It's called Blast, I think. So I'm doing a texture search here. Where the frick is the red blast store? This one is called Secure Access. And so we're just going to use that one instead. I'm not going to waste time looking for where the frick that thing is. But there is a red copy out there somewhere. And I'm not going to waste time finding it. So we're going to select the red base. We're going to go search, replace textures. Where was that? There we go. Okay. So now it is looking like a red base. So we replaced the lights. We replaced all the textures. Now we need to replace the team spawns. Otherwise, your blue team is going to be spawning in the red base, which we don't want. So I'm going to each of the team spawn entities and just changing their team to red. There's not a way that I know of to do this after you've copied the entities. And then we also need to change the backpacks to have their team number be 2 instead of 1, which is the red team. Blue team is 1, red team is 2. Not 12, 2. 2. There we go. I'm also going to delete the info player start. We only want one of those. And I'm going to move the original copy to be outside. And I'm just going to have it be kind of looking at the blue base. I'm just going to change the orientation of this guy so that it's looking at the blue base. So when you spawn when you load the map for the first time, it'll be looking in that direction. Okay, awesome. So let's create the red flag and the red capture point. So we're going into our prefabs for capture the flag. Boom, red flag. I'm going to move the red flag to be in the red base. And then I am going to move it to be on top of our pedestal. So I need to find it. That is where it spawned in our level. So you can see here it spawned lower than the door. So we want to 2 pixels above and then orient it to be in the center. And then I'm going to change its positioning so that it's facing outward, which the angle is 180. So we have to do it for both entities. Change the angle to be 180. Saving. And then now we want our red capture point. Boom. Big boom. Moving this under our red base. I'm then going to expand this, delete the poly it created, and I'm going to use this poly instead. Move this under red capture point, and then I have to change the positioning of the trigger to be on top of that capture point poly. You can see here it's spawning below the level. We want to move that to be up here. And there we go. Alrighty. So we now have both bases, both capture points. The last thing we need is a sky. So we are going to create a new cube, and we are going to put it in our yard. I'm just going to move the whole thing to fill up the whole yard. Because if we compiled the map right now, we would get a leak error because there is no top to our map. All right, there is the top. And we are going to select it, and the sky texture is aptly named sky. There we go. So we now have a sky. We are going to go back up to world spawn and select the entity information. And here you can change what sky you want to use. You can Google this. There is Google images of what all of these different skies look like. I am going to use a morning sky for mine. You can choose whatever one you want, but this is the whole sky. It's telling if you see a sky texture, use this skybox. Skybox is in the Half-Life engine what the outside world looks like if you use a sky. So it will automatically populate that in the engine. Okay, so we should have everything. Oh, the last thing we need to do is we need to go into the red base and change the door to open for the red team. We're going to change this to red team. Because right now I had it set that only the blue team could use it in the red base, which doesn't make any sense. Okay, I think we're finished. So we're going to go up to Half-Life and we're going to go to Go. This is going to compile our map. It's going to run through all of the executables we linked in the configuration with the compiler tools, and it is going to render the map for us. So, yep. One thing that's weird about Quark is that it launches using Half-Life, and I don't know of a way right now to have it use TFC, so it won't load your map for you. So it will spit it out in your Half-Life directory under a subfolder it created called TMP Quark and another subfolder called Maps. So you can see here is actually the BSP file, which is our map file. You need to copy that into your TFC Maps folder. And this is where I do my version control too. So if I've created a new version, I could come in here and do like _2 or B or B1 or whatever. That's usually where I handle my version control. And now I'm manually going to load TFC. And when I do that, I need to add a new capture. So let me do that real quick for everybody here. I believe that should work. And then we're going to go to TFC test and load the map. So, okay, one thing I forgot to create was actually more lights outside. So you can see here's the info player start entity. And you can see the morning skybox, but it's super freaking... Oh, you know what? I forgot to do one other thing too. The most important thing. So let's go. Let me quit out here and fix this real quick. All right. Wow, HF. All right. Let me remove this. We need to create a info. It's called info TF detect. This is the most important entity. Team Fortress Classic entities, This is what tells the... you need this in your map to let the world know that this is actually Team Fortress Classic. So I've created one inside of my map. I'm also going to create a light entity called light environment. And this is going to say wherever you see the sky texture in place, emit light from it. And I'm going to angle that light to be kind of coming down at a bit of an angle. And we're going to I'm going to change the intensity down a little bit. So now we have a light outside. And I also forgot to light our hallways. So I'm just going to duplicate our light entities real quick so there's light in the hallway. Because I could see, just looking at the map, that the hallways were super freaking not bright at all. Okay. So I've just duplicated the flagroom lights. And the flagroom lights are now in our hallways. I'm going to save and recompile this guy. The map is recompiling. It's a really tiny map. I have a fast computer. If you have a really big map, it could take a couple minutes, but if you shouldn't take more than that. So here is the new version. I'm going to call this one TFC_test2 and copy it in here for version control. I'm then going to relaunch Team Fortress Classic. And then I need to go back into OBS, and it's a new instance. So we're going to capture... Oh, gosh. There we go. All right. So I'm going to create a listen server, and you can see here's the second version of it. That looks a lot better. Looks a lot better. So you can see that there are only 2 teams because we've only created 2 team spawns. I will spawn as the blue team. And hey, here's our resupply room we've created. Here's our nice bags that we can grab. You can see they'll respawn after 5 seconds. Here's our door. You can hear it open and make the sound. Look at our flag. Here's our flag. Super cute. Our little flag room. Here's the hallway we created. And here is the outside. Here's our 2 bases and our capture points. Super cool. Another thing you could do is you could create a light right here to make the capture point be more obvious. I should have probably copied that blue light and put it here so it was more obvious that this is where the capture point is. But you can see here, if I go into the red base, I can't open this door. It won't let me in because I'm blue, but I can grab their flag. So I've grabbed their flag, and I'm going to take this back to the capture point. There you go. You'll see my team score went up by 10. I got 10, and I also got full grenades. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it gave me full grenades. That's because I told the entity to go ahead and do that. So if I switch to the red team, I should be able to grab these bags. Should be able to open the door. I shouldn't be able to grab my flag. And then we can go to the blue base and just make sure that we can grab the blue flag and capture the blue flag. So I can grab the flag. Going to do a nice little drop conk onto the capture point. There you go, folks. You can see my team score. My score went up by 10 again. Oh, look, I didn't get full grenades. I didn't get full grenades because I didn't go in and add those specifics and arguments when I created the red capture point. So it's little things like that you notice when you are creating a map where you could go in and do more clever or more cute things. Let's make a couple changes real quick before we end this session. I want to go to the red capture point entity, and I want to add my grenade values now because I want people to get full grenades. So, boom, we have full grenades now. And I also want to duplicate that light entity to be on the capture point, just for it to be more obvious to people that this is where you capture a flag. And I'm going to reduce its brightness. That's way too bright for me. I don't want it to be nearly that bright. I just want it to have a soft glow to it. I like using lights to highlight to the players where objectives are. It's just good map making practice to do that. Okay, so I've created lights. The last thing I want to do is I want to change my light environment. I want this to be more of a, have more of a color to it. Because it's morning, let's go with maybe kind of like a pinkish texture. And let's reduce the intensity a little bit more. So this is just going to add a little bit of color to our light, and then reduce its intensity a little bit, just to add a little more flair to it. All right, and let's go ahead and recompile. Alrighty, and it is finished compiling. Whoops. And let's go ahead and call this guy TFC test 3. And we will copy this thing into our TFC folder and launch TFC again. While doing that, where is OBS? All right, hold on. I don't know if it's not letting me get the game capture set up right. Okay. There we go. Game capture. Let's go. I should really stop closing TFC every freaking time. Okay, you guys should see TFC. We're creating a new listen server on the new map. There we go. So I want to play test and make sure I get full grenades. If you go outside, you can see that there's now little glow where the capture points are that correspond to the team colors, and then the outside light has changed. It's a lot more moody. I'm trying to simulate it being early morning. So, you know, there's not as much light. It looks a little dark. If I did this again, I'd probably make it a little brighter. But we're going to go ahead and grab the flag.
You have the enemy flag.
Do a drop con to the capture point. And you can see now I got full grenades. So that's working exactly how I intended. And if you followed this, you have created your first map. I'll make sure that I save a copy of this out there so that you can go in and edit this map as well and play with it yourself. If there are things you want to change, or if you want to use this as the basis of your own map. So hopefully you learned a little bit today. As a recap, I build one base at a time. What helps me is you can actually sit down with pen and paper and kind of draw out how you want to create your map. I typically texture as I go. I just finds it to be more quick and less work to do at the end. You want to create your rooms. Make sure your rooms are fully enclosed. You want to create lights to light those rooms. And then you want to make sure you have the appropriate entities to have your map function. You need an info player start entity that's going to show initially when you load the map. It's what's going to appear, the camera view that will appear. You want team spawns for both teams. You want to, if you want to resupply a room, you want some sort of door so the other team can't get to it that's associated with the team. So the blue base, only blue team members will be able to use that. You want to use the prefabs for your flag and your capture point. And then you want to duplicate your geometry if you want a symmetrical map, and use texture replace to replace all of the textures. So you can see here, that only took me an hour and a half, and I have a fully functional TFC map. Now, maybe it doesn't make sense that there's only one room. Maybe I want this to be the ramp room, and I'll create a second room where the flag actually exists. Or maybe I want to go in here and I'll create like a little battlements area instead. So another entryway to get into the base. Or maybe I want to create water and create a water entrance into the base. These are all other options you can do once you get the fundamentals down to expand and add on to your map. So hopefully y'all learned a little bit today, and thanks for joining me. But until next time, everybody, yeah, be safe, and if you're over the age of 21, drink some stag. Take care, y'all. See ya.